Across all these acts, it's only the woman who's entitled to maintenance. Biggest misconception is that there is this 50-50 split, which means that whatever is acquired post-marriage is just going to get divided in the center and you get half and I get half. That is not how it works in India at all. In India,
if we're talking about divorce, the case that comes to mind is Atul Subhash. A lot of issues in divorce are women-centric. Is that portrayal accurate?
Now, how divorce really works in India is
Aditi Mohoni is a seasoned divorce and matrimonial lawyer with over a decade of experience practicing in Mumbai. Today, she joins us to break down the legal and financial dimensions of divorce.
in India, marriage is a union of two souls. It is a religious ceremony, but I do think that
What's like the longest that you've worked on a divorce case?
the longest I've worked on a divorce case is 10 years and it's still ongoing.
How much of a percentage of divorce cases are we seeing in the country? So Aditi, if we're talking about divorce, the case that comes to mind is Atul Subhash, and of course that video that he put out of 81 minutes, the 24-page letter, which details the grueling financial and emotional turmoil that he went through. Now this sort of fuels the narrative that a lot of issues in divorce are women-centric. Is that portrayal accurate?
First and foremost, what we need to understand, in India, divorce is not gender specific, or anywhere rather in the world. Now, how divorce really works in India is that you have different religious laws, and depending on what you were married under and what your marriage is registered under is going to dictate how you get divorced, all right? So let's say you were married under the Hindu Marriage Act. You have certain grounds available to you, such as cruelty, desertion, conversion to another religion, and so on, adultery, in which you need to really agitate a claim and build out a case. Now, when I say build out a case, what it means is that you need to substantiate it with evidence. Tomorrow, it's very easy to file anything against anybody, okay, in court of law. But is that going to sustain? And if so, and if you really want your divorce, you need to back it up with evidence. Okay, you filed a petition for cruelty. How was your spouse cruel? What has he or she done to make sure that you've been mentally harassed, tortured, belittled in the marriage? Was there an element of financial cruelty? All of that needs to be understood. Similarly, you have other religious laws. For example, you have the Christian Divorce Act, you have the Parsis. All of that, the reliefs are somewhat similar, where you have to build out these cases against your spouse. And then comes the Special Marriage Act, which is sort of a civil legislation where two people of different religions want to get married, and that's what you resort to. But again, the reliefs available, barring a few things here and there, are more or less similar across all these acts.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
I think relief is just not a word that we associate with divorce, because
Right.
it tends to be a very challenging chapter in anyone's life. Of course, apart from the emotional, aspect, I want to talk about the questions that arise when it comes to wealth management, division of assets, and all of that. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the laws are governing this and what the legal process is? Typically, I believe there was a landmark judgment in 2019 as well.
So let's paint a picture before 2019, right?
Okay.
What essentially happened was, let's say a woman was in dire need of maintenance. Now let's understand the basics. When it comes to maintenance, primarily across all these acts, it's only the woman who's entitled to maintenance. All
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Only the Hindu
Because the
marriage.
man is the sole breadwinner.
Because
usually.
also it's been a patriarchal, we've sort of lived in that patriarchal framework for such a long period of time that these laws that evolved in the 1950s have kind of just continued with that thought process, haven't really evolved. With the exception of the Hindu Marriage Act, which at the time of enforcement in 1955 actually had a provision that in the event the man was also incapable of providing for himself, he could actually turn to the woman. And her income and assets and so on would be considered.
Okay.
Of course, you see very few cases like that. It's mostly the women who do agitate that claim. Now, when you agitate a claim like this, you have to ensure that A, you are incapable of providing for yourself, and you have to obviously back that up with evidence to show that you enjoyed a particular standard of living when you were married, which was provided to you by your husband. Now, before 2019, what would happen is automatically, just before a divorce, the man would become a pauper and the woman would be solely sort of dependent on her husband's income. And you'd find a lot of men not really disclosing their assets, their wealth, and so on, and women kind of exaggerating it and not disclosing what they actually own, what their savings are.
Yeah.
So in 2019, there was a very interesting judgment that came up, which is the Rajneesh versus Neha judgment. And it's kind of made a uniform law when it comes to filing for any claim of maintenance, all right? Both the husband and the wife, at the time of filing such an application, they have to disclose their assets and liabilities.
Okay.
So you make an affidavit, which is known as the affidavit of disclosure of assets and liabilities, which includes information from your educational qualifications to what liabilities you have, what are your income tax returns 1 year prior to marriage, at the time of marriage, 1 year before separation, and then after filing, that application. So it's very detailed.
All done in black and white.
Essentially, of
Yeah.
course, people are creative
Yeah,
and there are
yeah.
ways to skirt around that
Sure.
as well. But
Yeah.
then what happens is the court has the right to draw adverse inference if you don't disclose all the details correctly or they feel that you're hiding something.
So if we were to understand it better, is the divorce law in India favoring any one gender?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I do feel, however, that there are more legislations in place for women when it comes to seeking relief. In 2005, we had the Domestic Violence Act that was enacted, especially for women, both married and unmarried, in live-in relationships, to kind of agitate some kind of claims, get some kind of relief from the courts. You also have maintenance provisions which are more women-centric, barring, of course, the Hindu Marriage Act. But what you need to understand that while these legislations do exist, the time frame that actually comes to executing them takes very long. So let's say if a woman makes a claim for maintenance today, it's a possibility. Of course, every case is different, but it's a possibility that it might take about 2 years for her to actually receive any relief. So while men do argue saying that, women can go and file A complaint, B complaint, they can file a 498 case, they can file a dowry case, they can file, a domestic violence case, and they have different verticals of reliefs available to them. How, in reality, they aren't necessarily all enforceable, or you can't execute them as immediately as you would like to. There is some amount of nuisance value, perhaps, which maybe men don't have so many avenues. For a man, ideally, the only thing that he could do is file for divorce. He can file for custody of his children. If there is a property that is disputed and he's added his wife's name only as just for the sake of taxes, he can agitate a claim in court, which is the declaratory suit, claiming that it's actually his property. But over and above that, women do have many avenues of relief available to them, which
Okay.
is not necessarily the case for men.
But can you tell us a little bit about how the division of assets typically works in the divorce and what laws are in place to guide this process?
So I think the biggest misconception is that there is this 50-50 split, right? In the US and most of the West, you have this communal split of property, which means that whatever is acquired post-marriage is just going to get divided in the center, and you get half and I get half. That is not how it works in India at all.
Okay.
In India, as a woman, you're only entitled to maintenance, okay? In addition to a right to live in your matrimonial home. That's all you have. You don't even have a stake in that property, just by being that person's wife.
Yeah.
So what you essentially will need to do is, first and foremost, you will have to build out a case, substantiate with concrete evidence that your husband earns X amount of rupees, these are his qualifications, these are his investments, these are his properties, this is the standard of living that we enjoyed. How will you prove the standard of living? Maybe hotel receipts, credit card bills, electricity bills, how often you all dined out, things like that. Maybe how did you travel, how often you traveled, so on and so forth. So I think you have to be really alert. These are one of those things where, the problem arises only after this sort of glory period is over. And very often you don't have any of these receipts, or you don't have any of this evidence available with you. So I think somewhere being alert, that this is important, that in the event something like this does strike you tomorrow, you need to have some basic information, basic awareness, right? One thing I want to add that, you've seen in India, there's so much of cash floating around.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to business families, the boy might be earning a salary of 1 lakh or 2 lakh rupees on paper, but they're living this lavish lifestyle of traveling to the best 5-star hotels and traveling business class and first class. So how are you going to prove that? Because the income is only 2 lakhs and you're only entitled to what the income and assets are.
Sure.
So somewhere then, it's akin to lifting that corporate veil, where you will have to show that, look, he might be earning 2 lakh rupees, but this is the kind of house we live in. These are the cars we have. These are the drivers we have. This is the staff that he has. Look at his office. These are the number of employees that he has. And kind of taking it from there and building that narrative. So it's a lot of work, a lot of homework. You can't just show up at a lawyer's office and say, okay, look, I want maintenance. First and foremost, understand why do you need maintenance? How much maintenance do you need? If you need that maintenance, how are you going to substantiate it? You can't just wake up tomorrow and say, okay, I want 10 crore rupees. All right, let's say you want 10 crore rupees. How have you arrived at that figure? What justifies 10 crore rupees? What can you show me that proves that, you spent maybe close to 10 lakh rupees a month? Is it your medical bills? Is it your grocery bills? I mean, rent? So you need to justify it.
Yeah.
There's one thing that you need to keep in mind is that maintenance is not a dole that's awarded, okay? The whole idea of maintenance was to make sure that a woman can stand up on her feet in that transition period after she gets divorced.
Okay.
That's the objective of maintenance. It's not just a mere handout.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we lose sight over.
Yeah.
And that's why you have cases like Atul Subhash and stuff being highlighted, because today we are fighting for equality on one hand, where women want to walk on par with men, but at the same time we are attempting to extract these large amounts where it's not required.
Yeah.
In some cases it is, and it's absolutely justified. But in some cases where the woman is earning more than the man, just by the sheer,
Greed.
Yeah, of her being a woman, she isn't entitled to maintenance necessarily.
Okay. So can you just give us a sense, because I do have, a friend of mine who has been married, but it was for a very short period. Just after getting married, within 3 months, the couple decided to go in for a divorce, and they said, we want to do things very amicably. We're both on the same page, but they weren't able to do that amicably. Why is that?
So typically how it works is, you need to be married for 1 year. That means a minimum period of 1 year is required for you to be able to initiate divorce proceedings. Now, if you add an amicable divorce to this, you also require a separation of 1 year. So let's say your friends were married for a period of 3 months. They can, this year, next year is ideally when they can file a petition for divorce. But given the fact that they need to be separated for 1 year, it's going to be 1 year, 3 months when they can act from the date of their marriage, when they can actually file that petition jointly, and when the matter will get settled. Prior to that, you can only honestly file for annulment of marriage, which is again a contested proceedings.
So what is the difference between an annulment and
Okay, so a divorce basically means that you were married and now you cease to be married and you're separated, you're officially divorced, separated from that person. And annulment is as though the marriage never happened. You're just annulling it altogether. You're just erasing it, basically, a record of that.
Okay.
That's the difference.
And that can happen within a year of being married.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Aditi, let's go down that amicable route. If that is what the couples are on the same page about, or the couple is, okay, A and B, who are married to each other, it's been 4 years, say there are no children involved. Now, for the man and the woman separately, what are the steps that they need to ensure? What are the common financial mistakes or pitfalls that they need to avoid?
As a man, what you really need to be careful about is the fact that you might have to give out this big chunk of money as your maintenance. So your main prerogative is going to be to protect that, right? Now, understand that the law is very clear. After that affidavit that you have to sort of submit in court, you have to declare what your assets, incomes, all of that is 1 year prior to marriage. So now if you make any sudden changes, or you start selling off property, or you start, transferring property onto XYZ person's name, it's going to be a bit of a problem, because they're going to realize that you're doing this only because you don't want to pay your spouse alimony. Ideally, this is a conversation that you need to have with your parents, with your family before you get married, in terms of how are you going to secure yourself in the event something does not work out. You may want to consider a private trust which your parents want to create for you. Maybe, you're doing really well in your career. You might be wanting to show that your parents are dependent on you. You're giving certain amount of money to them. Similarly, from the woman's perspective, it's the opposite way, right? Because she wants to secure as much as possible for herself, which then means that the higher the income of the husband, the more she's essentially entitled to get from court. So then she will have to show that, okay, look, he's earning XYZ. He doesn't have any liabilities. There are probably no children. His parents are kind of independent. They're not dependent on him at all for their finances. And which is why I require the money, because my expenses are A, B, C, D. And because at the time that I was married to him, I enjoyed this very inflated lifestyle, or this lifestyle which, deserves to give me about 2 lakh rupees a month as maintenance. That's what she will have to prove.
Okay. I think where the tricky part is when there are joint bank accounts, perhaps, which is common.
Yeah.
When there are properties which are joint or co-owned, or perhaps, the wife being signed on as a director or as part of the company. What does one do then when it comes to your financial assets? Both parties, of course.
So look, if it's mutual, it's really easy. When you file your consent terms in court, you will sort of enter into this agreement saying that after, we file and before the decree of divorce is passed, we're going to withdraw, we're going to close this account, or I'm going to withdraw from being a director in this company, and so on and so forth. So all the modalities of how that's going to work is captured in your consent terms, and it's really recommended that you don't keep anything pending. Sort of finish everything off, don't keep any loose ends. It needs to be a conclusive process. When the matter is contested is when it becomes challenging, because if they're both joint account holders in a particular account, it could have so happened that one of the parties has already withdrawn all the funds in that account, and that account just exists without any money sort of lying in it, right? Or let's say, the wife is a director in the husband's company. Now that's great nuisance value. It's a great negotiation chip for the wife to say that, look, I'm not going to sign this off until and unless you give me what my ask is. So one really needs to understand how the matter is progressing to be able to address these issues. But of course, if it comes to court, the court really in a matrimonial proceedings is not entitled to, sort of adjudicate on her being a director in the company.
Now, when it comes to slightly wealthier families, we tend to hear of the prenuptial.
Yeah.
How important is it to have that in place? And what about even these postnuptial agreements?
So prenups are not valid in India.
Oh.
The reason being that in India, marriage is a union of two souls. It is a religious ceremony. It is not a contract. Okay? Having said that, any sort of agreement which captures, how division of assets and so on are going to be addressed is going to be null and void.
Okay.
So how could you protect your
Yeah.
assets in such
Yeah.
a scenario, right? Is then maybe you consider private trust just before the person gets married. So that's one way of
Yes.
protecting them, and a viable way of doing so. When it comes to post-nuptial agreements, what tends to happen is they usually find themselves in the manner of consent terms when the parties are parting. So let's say you agree that, okay, there's an issue in the marriage and this is how we're going to sort it out. Many a times you take that agreement and you just replicate it to form your consent terms in court, and that's completely okay. But as on its own, if I were to say that, let's say the matter is litigated tomorrow and you have this post-nuptial agreement, that may not necessarily be valid.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that about a prenuptial agreement. I think we're just so used to sort of seeing it in the movies and things like that that we just assume it exists here.
Very
but it's
true.
absolutely not valid.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the key factors that a court of law considers when it comes to dividing of assets and liabilities? If you want to break it down, men, women, working women.
So like I said, women are only entitled to maintenance by law. Okay. So let's say a husband and wife are living in the family home, where his parents are also residing. She only has a right to reside there.
Okay.
Or let's say tomorrow the husband buys a house and it's only standing in his own name. She only gets a right to reside there. That's it. She doesn't necessarily have a claim in that property. Okay. So by law, when we talk about division of assets and so on, if it's going to be contested, women are only entitled to maintenance.
Okay.
So there's no real division of assets as such. Assets are only considered from the purview of calculating that maintenance. That's it.
So how is that maintenance calculated? Can you give me an example?
So maintenance is typically calculated, like I told you, based on the income of the husband, on the income of the wife, if she has any, and the standard of living that they've enjoyed in the course of the marriage. Okay. Now, this sounds great on paper. The reality is very different. First and foremost, as a wife who's seeking a claim for maintenance, you need to substantiate what that amount is, why you need it, and how you can prove that that's what you need. So you need bills and so on to kind of substantiate that amount.
Do you have any examples?
So yeah, so a case that I was handling where the wife had asked for maintenance. she asked for about 10 lakhs, 10 to 12 lakh rupees a month, and the husband was over 1,000 crores. All she ended up receiving was about 3 lakh rupees a month, you know. And she did have receipts and she did have bills to kind of substantiate, not up to 10 lakhs, but maybe up to 4.5, 5 lakhs. But understand that courts are not very liberal when it comes to giving maintenance, because again, maintenance is not supposed to be this handout that's just allotted, right? It's to be given only when it's really required. So from our perspective, it was a great order because, you know, we didn't have to give out that much, and he was anyway taking care of the child independently. So this is essentially what she got just for herself.
Okay. Now, what happens when the spouse fails to pay the court-ordered support?
Let's understand this from two perspectives. Let's say we have a mutual consent petition. One thing I would like to say is, in a mutual consent petition, ideally, if there are no children, don't keep anything pending for later on. Take a lump sum and get done with it, okay?
Okay.
Because tomorrow, if he doesn't pay, you're going to be back knocking on the doors of the court asking for that money. So let's say he does not pay. Okay, then you come to court, you will have to file a petition for execution saying that, look, these are the consent terms that were agreed upon. Or let's say in a contested petition, you get an order for maintenance of 50,000 rupees or 1 lakh rupees a month, and he pays you for 2 months and he stops paying thereafter. Again, you have to file a petition for execution of the proceedings, where you will have to show how much you've received, how much is in arrears. That will be presented in the court, the husband will file a reply, and that will just go on indefinitely. You know how it works in court. I mean, it's been going on for the last 3 years. The wife has not received a rupee.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, these long drawn legal battles.
Yeah,
they
and
do.
it's also, I mean, I don't think it's the courts to blame necessarily. They're dealing, these courts came up in the 1980s. That's when the Family Courts Act was passed. Back then, divorce was few and far in between. It was a taboo. Right? Things have changed today. So if you had 7 courts back in the day in the 1980s, that was, I would say, a fairly liberal amount of courts to have to be dealing with these sort of matters. But today there's a huge backlog.
Now let's get into the part with child support. Typically, how is that sum calculated and how does it work?
So I would say it's very similar to maintenance of a woman. You need to substantiate what the school fees are, what the expenses of the child are, what his extracurriculars are. Everything has to be documented.
And this is all for a child under the age of 18 or?
Yeah, so typically how it works is that boys are entitled to maintenance only till they are 18.
Okay.
Women are entitled beyond 18 till they are married.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
or they are working, you know, however the courts sort of want to view it.
Okay. Can child support or can alimony be modified after the divorce has been filed, and if so, under what circumstances?
Absolutely. So, look, especially when it comes, let's talk about children first. Especially when it comes to children, the law is not absolute in the sense that the welfare of the child is the most important thing that's going to be considered at any point of time, all right? So, let's say today, you know, 1 lakh rupees is more than enough for the child on a monthly basis. But let's say tomorrow the child wants to undertake some higher education or some classes or wants to become a sports person, you know, requires really very skilled sort of classes. The expenditure is going to go up. And in that case, they can agitate a claim, they can go back to the courts, they can say, look, our circumstances have changed. Similarly, let's say the husband is paying money today. Tomorrow he doesn't have money, tomorrow he loses his job. He can go to the court saying that, look, I have adhered to the consent terms very honestly and very religiously up until when I did have a job. However, I don't have a job today. My circumstances have changed. You know, please allow me to now revisit and sort of modify these consent terms as per XYZ. And of course, then you have to substantiate it, you have to prove it and so on. And the wife will also have to then put forth her point of view, and then the court will decide. But there are some cases where the man and woman will both decide that, okay, amicably now we want to modify this. So that can also be done. That provision always exists.
Okay. And
Yeah.
what about things like jewelry and things like that? And how does one ensure that you're getting your adequate share when it comes to assets such as this?
So now jewelry, it's interesting, right? Because jewelry that was gifted at the time of marriage and in the course of marriage is what is known as a woman's Stridhan. She is entitled to that, which means it is hers.
Okay.
So even if you're doing it mutually or otherwise, technically that is going to be yours. No one can take it away from you. But in a mutual consent, sometimes you say that, okay, you know what, I'm going to give up my Stridhan, I'm going to let go of my jewelry in lieu of XYZ amount of money as alimony. And it's just an agreement that the two of them come to. when it comes to your contested proceedings, if you have your Sridhan with you, great, okay? I would really recommend you take pictures of it, pictures from your marriage, document it and so on. Because tomorrow, let's say for whatever reason, you are fighting this matter out, how are you going to prove that the jewelry is with you? Versus, what if tomorrow your husband says, no, she's already taken her jewelry and gone? You know, I had a case that I was doing a few years ago where where the husband, I was for the woman in this case, and the husband very smartly said that the woman had no jewelry of her own and she borrowed all my family's jewelry, and whatever was worn in the at the time of the wedding was actually my family's jewelry, and she's taken all of that with her and gone, and there's no Sridhan as such that exists. This jewelry was not given to her as a gift, it was just given to her on a borrowal basis. What do you do? Right? So then as a woman, then you need to be alert and be sure that, okay, you're making that list, that checklist, photographs, evidence, bills, all of this has to be kept. You don't know when you're going to need it.
And flipping it the other way, like the case that we started off talking about where women actually abuse that right, how can men also ensure that they are not taken for a ride?
Yeah, which is why then you have your trusts that become important. You have, you know, maybe have a joint account, but don't put your entire salary in that joint account. Maybe create a little bit of a separate account, which is just for you and your wife, you know, more so for her to kind of use, or maybe an account where both of you all pool in certain amount of monies. You know, kind of have an understanding in terms of if this goes amicably, how y'all would sort of address it. These conversations are really sort of important, I feel, and they need to be had.
Yeah, I don't think of it as a taboo or that won't happen to us. These are realistic, possible scenarios, and they need to be discussed so that you're not, you know, left years and years running to the courts, right?
100%, and I think we're seeing that more so after COVID, right? The number of people who've gone down this divorce route has just been increasing day by day. And in such a scenario, you want to be aware. From both sides, why do you want to spend the rest of your life fighting in court?
Yeah.
There's very little meaning to that, you know, versus you picking up the remains of what's left, moving on, securing your children, making sure that they are mentally okay. And just being fair, I mean, men need to understand that women have also contributed to this marriage.
Yeah.
And, you know, the fact that they need to be respectful when they're actually handing out alimony or actually having a discussion with regards to that. Similarly, women also need to understand that just asking for any Abid figure is not justified.
Yeah.
Understand what you need, what are your requirements, what is post-divorce, what is life going to look like? You know, where do you see yourself requiring money? Do you need a house? Do you need, how much do you need for medical? How much do you need for your children? Actually have a plan. With that plan, come up with that number. What I've seen is it's always the reverse. Oh, I need 20 crores. Oh, I need 15 crores. Okay, but why do you need it? Are you going to get it? No, I need 20 crores and a house over my head. Okay, why? That sounds great, but are you going to get it? Is your husband in a position to give it to you? Probably not, right? Then you need to be really honest and figure out what is it that you need, and your lawyer also needs to be able to tell you that, look, this is not happening.
Yeah.
You know, let's get a reality check that start with what you need and then take it from there.
So just for the sake of simplicity, in your experience, would it just be advisable for a couple where both the people are earning to have one joint account but definitely maintain their own accounts separately from the get-go?
I would think so.
Okay.
However, that does not mean that that separate account is not going to come under the purview of calculations when you're doing your contested divorce. Okay? It absolutely is. But I think you can just make it cleaner, because if I, as a man, am already maintaining my wife, I'm already contributing, the chances of her getting a larger share from me are slim, because I'm already doing my duty. Then over and above that, if me contributing 1 lakh rupees to that pool is enough for her to kind of maintain that lifestyle, I may not necessarily have to give her more.
Okay.
Understand the law is very clear that maintenance is required only to maintain yourself, not for fancies and frivolous lifestyles, right? And I think that's what we lose sight of.
Yeah. And also, as a couple who's looking to divorce, how do you update your real estate plans, insurance policies, and beneficiaries?
So first and foremost, let's assume that this is pre-divorce, okay? And you've realized that there's an issue that you're having with your spouse. So you want to obviously change your nominations, because you may not necessarily want your spouse who you're separating from to be the beneficiary of those things. So just have a checklist in place in terms of, you know, I have these assets, I have these accounts, I have these policies. nominations are obviously required everywhere, so make sure you change all of that. That could be a starting point. Have a will in place, because let's say you made a will when things were hunky-dory between you and your spouse, that may not necessarily reflect your state of mind today.
Yes.
So just making sure that everything is cohesive, everything kind of ties in together with what your thought process is really important. And of course, post divorce also the same thing would apply. You may not want to give your spouse the benefits of your PPF or your accounts and so on. So just change that across the border. It's so easy to really rewrite your will and to change it. You don't even need to register it. Similarly with your nominations, you just have to go to the bank, you have to submit those forms, and it's a really easy process. It can be changed at any point of time. So having all of that in place is important.
Okay. And what about for individuals who are self-employed or own a business? Do things change, and how does divorce actually impact them?
So when they're self-employed,
Either of the spouses.
yeah. So let's assume in this case the woman is self-employed, okay, and she is still going ahead and claiming maintenance from the husband. The fact that she has this business will be taken into account. The fact that whether she's drawing a salary. Now she could be like I said, she could be drawing a very meager salary, but she could be having these luxuries and expenses. Then her business income will also be considered. And the same thing will work for the husband. Now the joint family is where you need to be careful. Because what will happen is, let's say your husband was only earning 1 lakh, but you're living this lavish lifestyle, then the income of every family member, that joint business, everything will be considered. Okay. That's where it becomes, a bit of a trouble process.
Can you update us? Have there been any recent changes in the law that one needs to be acutely aware of when it comes to divorce now in India?
I wouldn't say there necessarily have been any significant changes when it comes to the financial aspect of it. We have been talking about having a uniform civil code for a long time. But I do think that, when it comes to maintenance, I think the courts do look at it from a case-to-case basis. I think they do understand cases where it is genuine, where women actually do need money, where men actually don't have the ability to give money. The only thing is that this process takes time. And if there was some way to expedite it, that would be great, because I think that would be beneficial to both sides. But as such, there have been no changes per se in the law when it comes to distribution of finances. The Rajneesh versus Neha case was, I think, a step in the right direction, because earlier we would have to make applications for disclosure of income, assets and so on. We would have to ask for those documents. Courts have made it very easy. They've listed it out and said, okay, now you give us all of this. So it just sort of eliminates a step, taking you closer to the finality and the conclusion of the process.
And now, God forbid, apart from the fact that you're going through that emotional turmoil of a divorce, there's marital debt. How does that play out in the divorce proceedings?
So that's a very interesting question, because I think the courts will determine this on a case-to-case basis. Okay. Very recently, there was a judgment, Apurvo versus Dolly, I think that's what it was called. It was a Supreme Court judgment, which basically said that the maintenance of a woman should come before, paying off loans, before creditors and so on. Now this applies when a man is using debt as a shield to kind of skirt paying maintenance to the woman. So it really depends on the court in terms of what the case is and how the debt sort of comes into play. Of course, if it's genuine, let's say a man has 100 rupees and he's in debt, and what it leaves him with is only 30 rupees, then that 30 rupees is what the woman is going to be entitled to, provided, of course, that they have been living that lifestyle within the 30 rupees. It is always a case-to-case basis. It's not one size fits all.
Okay, understood. But what if there's a case where, yes, a settlement has been decided and the husband has been paying it out for the first 2 years, post which, for some reason, he does not have the financial means to actually pay that amount? Can that be revisited? Can it be contested? How does it work?
No, it can 100% be revisited. What he needs to do is then file a miscellaneous petition saying that, look, my circumstances have changed. When this order was passed, I was earning 100 rupees. However, because of whatever reason, and I'm now earning 50. So I'm not capable of paying, the 70 or the 30 or whatever it was that I was initially directed to pay. Of course, he will have to substantiate it.
Yes.
He will have to give proofs of it. If the court is satisfied, they will revisit and revise that order.
Now, what about the case when the spouses have a joint property? Don't things get really messy then?
They do get messy. First and foremost, when they have a joint property, has there been only one particular spouse who's contributed to that property, or have they both equally contributed? If they've equally contributed, it's very, very contentious, because then you have to go and file a property suit in the event they don't agree with each other and really figure out who's the rightful owner of this property, or the court will then direct them to sell off that property and so on.
Okay.
If only one of them has contributed towards the property, and let's say the other has been added just for taxation purposes or convenience purposes, then you can initiate what is known as a declaratory suit, proving that, look, I've bought this property, I've added my spouse's name to it, but I am the one who's paid everything, including the EMI, all the payments and so on. And if the court is satisfied, they might rule that the property is rightfully yours.
All right, Aditi, it's really been eye-opening. Thank you so much for walking us through this, because divorce as it is such a challenging chapter in people's lives. And I think these steps just help people to make sure that they're financially secure and that it can happen a little bit more amicably. Lots of key takeaways from this episode. The fact that divorce laws in India are not gender specific. Generally, given that we're in a patriarchal society, the woman is entitled to residing in the marital home as well as a sum for maintenance. You can, even if the fact that it started off with a lot of contesting, go the amicable route and try and make sure that you have these conversations at an earlier stage. Try and make sure, especially as a woman, that you are financially secure and that you have a plan in place. And of course, if you have been awarded a sufficient sum, try and ensure that you get a financial advisor so that you know how to best protect yourself through your lifetime. Do tell us what have been some of the key takeaways from the episode in the comments section. Do remember to subscribe to Personal Finance TV. I'll catch you in the same episode. Thank you for watching.